And we're recording. Well, hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jillian. If you're new around here, then consider subscribing because this is the Wong fam. And yeah. Anyways, I was inspired by God today to share my story because a lot of you guys know me and know like the bulk of my story, but not a lot of you guys know why I moved to Vietnam and how God told me to move to Vietnam. And I had an opportunity to share my story to a girl I met at a party this week. And when I shared with her, I wasn't expecting to have anything come out of it. But for some reason, when I shared my story with her, she was inspired and she was like taken aback about how personal God can be in our lives. And so if I can do that for her, then hopefully I can do that for any one of you guys who are watching this video. So that's my inspiration behind this video. I guess we can call it Wongspiration. Let's get started. So before we get started, I want to notify you that I will be breaking this video up into two segments, part 1 and part 2. Why? Because I think
there's too much to pack into one video, and so we're going to separate into 2 videos. Okay.
So part 1 is going to be how God told me to move to Vietnam, and part 2 is going to be what God has done for me since moving to Vietnam. So this video is part 1, so let's get started. Fast forward back to 2016. I was then a very new Christian. I have given my life to Jesus. I have surrendered my life to Him. I have fallen in love with Him, on fire for God, as you can say. Going to church consistently, being very active in community, being very personal and intimate with my relationship with God, always hearing from God, always on par with Him. And I was working at a coffee trailer back then, and I loved my job. I loved my team, my co-workers, and it was just a really good environment. But I knew that it wasn't my end place, that I wanted to move on. I've always been someone who's very driven and very ambitious, and I thought, no way I'm gonna end up here for my whole life. And so I was praying a lot for God to open a new door, maybe a 9-to-5 job, maybe a fancy office job, just because the trailer in the summertime is like a metal box and it is so hot and the bees are swarming because of the honey and the sweet syrup from the coffee, and it was a miserable place in the summer, and I really so badly wanted God to open a new door for me. And I prayed and I prayed. I applied for jobs, applied for internships, and it was just like door after door getting closed on me, and it was a clear sign from God that He wanted me to stay. I remember a huge sign from Him like giving me a red light on pursuing other jobs. And so, being the obedient Christian that I am, I stopped applying for jobs and I just said, okay, God, I will trust you. I will stay here until you tell me so. So the summer passed, and then the fall came, and then the winter came. And it was around this time that my best friend Rachel had quit her job and decided to move across the country to pursue a teaching job. And Rachel has always been a very spontaneous and like adventurous person, and I remember her telling me one time like, hey Jillian, you should come with me. And I'm someone who loves my comfort zone. I'm someone who, you know, like is not as adventurous as Rachel. So I actually said, yeah, in your dreams. And she, you know, told me, I have a feeling you're going to be coming with me. And back then I had no idea what she was saying, and so I'm like, okay, whatever, you can think that. And as time went on, it was September 27th when my little sister and I were driving to Houston because she had a modeling interview, and I was kind of going with her to support her. And I was sitting in the passenger seat, and you know, we had like music playing, kind of, it's a long ride from Austin to Houston, it's like 3 hours. So I was looking out the passenger seat window, and like the clouds were beautiful, the sun was out, beautiful day, and I was just like kind of, you know, in my own head when I had an idea. Maybe I should go with Rachel. And that idea was like a very passionate idea. Like, it came out of nowhere. And I was like, kind of living for it. And I told my sister, and she thought I was crazy, but I thought I was crazy as well. And so the more and more the days went on, the idea grew stronger. Like, the idea did not go away. The idea to follow Rachel. Sorry about that. I had my food delivery call me, so I had to go get my food. Okay, going back to the story. So the idea grew bigger and bigger as the days went on, and finally it was a Sunday and I was at church. I believe it was October 3rd when I was at church, and I still had this idea in me, and I really wanted to hear from God personally. So as I had my head bowed down during the communion time, I remember I was praying and I said, God, I've been having this idea this whole time. I just need to hear a clear and loud sign that it is really you. And as I had my head bowed down and eyes closed, I heard a loud voice say, go, go, go. And I was so scared because that means I have to go. I got up and I went to my mentor and I asked her, I just heard God's voice. Is this real? And so she started saying that sometimes in life, God calls us to step out of our comfort zones to follow him. Like when Jesus called Matthew, when he was a fisherman, to say, follow me. And Matthew dropped his fishing nets and followed Jesus. And I knew in that moment that that was the beginning of something big. And, I started to do things, started to tell my parents, tell Rachel, tell my roommates. I had to sell my car, sell my clothes, quit my job. And in the beginning, it was all very exciting and like, this is a new life, God is gonna open up new doors for me. I'm finally able to quit my job at the coffee trailer. And the only thing that was holding me back was my dog, Sky. So Sky is like my best friend. He went to work with me. He would stay out in the field when I was working in the trailer. He would come to grocery shopping with me. He would stay in the car with me. He would sleep on the same bed with me. He was my best friend and my everything. And I knew I couldn't just abandon him. And so for a really long time, I just prayed like, God, if you're calling me across, the world, what about Sky? What am I going to do about Sky? And of course there was two things in my mind. I could give him to my sister or my friend to take care of him, or he would come with me. That was the two options that I had. But God had a different option. It was October 5th when I finally surrendered Sky to God. I remember sitting in the car after having a very emotional day, and I was just like, you know what, God, okay, whatever happens for Sky, I trust that you will take care of him. I give him to you. And as I said that prayer, I remember he was sitting in my passenger seat, and I looked at him, so innocent and so happy. And God heard that prayer, because on October 7th, he was hit by a car. Now, I'm not saying that God killed Sky. I'm not saying that by surrendering Sky to God, that God said, okay, well, I will take him out of your life. I just think that sometimes God knows what happens and he works it for the good of you. He knew that Sky would be taken away from me soon, and he knew how hurt I would be. So he had to work in my heart to soften my heart, to humble my heart, so that when the time came that I knew I was close to God, and that, it was sort of like my permission in a way. And so when Sky passed away, I knew how sure I was at that point that I had to go. I had to go. There was nothing holding me back anymore. The only thing holding me back was my dog. And now my dog passed away. I started making things happen. Like, I quit my job. I gave my car to my dad. I got rid of my room. I got rid of a lot of my clothes, became a huge minimalist. And the time finally came, January 21st, when was my trip to Singapore first to see my mom, and then from there I would just go to Vietnam. So at this point, Rachel has moved from Thailand to Vietnam because she felt in her heart that God was actually pushing her to Vietnam. That story I don't really know personally, but I knew that somehow God had to place her in Vietnam so that our final destination was Vietnam. And so I packed my bags. I was scared to death, okay? Not scared, but I was nervous as heck. Do you know how difficult is it to move across the world in a small luggage? Like, I kid you not, the week before I moved to Vietnam, I had a huge knot in my back. I went to my chiropractor and he said, "Are you stressed?" I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "I can tell, like, you're really tense, like, on this left side." I did everything. I put like a hot patch, I put tiger oil, I had chiropractor, I had massage, but the knot wouldn't go away. I was so stressed from moving, you know, all the bills, all the loose ends I had to tie up, you know, but God is faithful. You know, at the end I had this farewell party. It was such a good party. All the people from my high school, my work, my university, my church, they all came and said their farewells, pray for me, hug me, had a good time, gave me gifts, gave me gift cards. Yeah, I felt really loved that day. And yeah, we said our goodbyes. I cried, of course, I was miss my dad. And then sooner or later, on March 1st, I ended up in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. And God is so good, you know, and I can't wait to share with you part 2 of this story, of what God has been up to, what I've been up to. You know, so much has happened, but I'll share that with you in part 2 of this video. So if anything I want you to take away from this video is that God wants to be personal in your life. God wants to give you purpose. You know, every time that I was scared, every time that I tune in to God and pray to God, and when He does touches my heart and I feel His presence, that reminds me of my purpose. Like, there's a thing between choosing this world and then choosing God. And when you choose God and when you're like in alignment with God, somehow, like, it just makes sense. It just makes sense, and I can't explain how, but I knew that I have no regrets. That following God has no regrets. Following God is just like walking closer into who I really am. It just feels like the more I walk into who I want to be, I fail. But when I walk into who God wants me to be, it makes more sense. You know, I don't know myself, but God knows me. And so I'm done trying to live for myself, and I'm ready to live for Him. And I've been living for Him since I moved to Vietnam, and no regrets. God has been so good, so faithful. I'm so thankful for everything. And yeah, so thank you for listening to my story. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm going to tune out now. I'm going to have lunch because it's getting cold. And yeah, remember, you're right. I'm wrong.
You're right, I'm wrong.